perhaps you could just talk a little bit about the history of the foundation, how it came about in the first place, and why it was seen as necessary and a useful addition to the landscape.
Sure, thank you. I'm happy to be here today. Well, the foundation started about 10 years ago, and we are now, and we always have been, focused on funding research. So our initial drive was really to think about how we could take the attention and kind of platform that Michael Fox had and convert that into a galvanized effort and hopefully a strategic effort to really advance new treatments to the patient community. And of course, we didn't know what that really meant at the beginning, and it is a departure from the more traditional role that disease charities play. More frequently, you would see disease groups grassroots-oriented and focused on providing direct services to patients in their disease community. Some organizations existed that were focused on that already, but there was a real lack of strategic and kind of aggressive efforts to fund research, particularly for new treatments.
So tell us a little bit, just briefly, about Michael J. Fox himself and how his personal journey that led to his involvement in this, and why he decided to get involved in a different way. Well,
of course, Michael Fox is a Parkinson's patient. His first symptoms were at age 29 when he was filming a movie, Doc Hollywood, and he's written a couple books where he's talked about this, but that's a very young age to be symptomatic and have signs of Parkinson's, so it took a while to be diagnosed, although that's actually a common problem even in 40s and 50s. Until someone really gets to the more typical age of onset for Parkinson's at around 60, it's often pretty tough to be diagnosed. And he was diagnosed at age 30. He continued to work and essentially hide his illness. But 7 or 8 years into it, that became more and more challenging. And as he struggled with the personal decision to step away from his full-time acting career, one of the things that he contemplated and ultimately acted on was what kind of role could he play as part of the Parkinson's community, which was really something that he hadn't embraced fully. He lurked around in chat rooms disguised as not as Michael, but he hadn't been public, and so there was a real opportunity for him to think of what role he could play to both raise awareness, but also to perhaps move the dial and help make a difference for patients. And of course, he focused that energy on raising dollars for research, and then our organization has been built with the goal of deploying those funds strategically.
And were there any model patient organizations that were doing similar sorts of things in other disease areas that were useful at that point?
If there were, we didn't really appreciate it at the time. I'd say the one person that we spoke to early who kind of helped shape some thinking, but only at the very highest levels, was Mike Milken, who had done work in prostate cancer. And, we had a funny 40-minute, kind of meeting over hot water, to talk about, things that we should know. And both Michael and I found that to be extremely informative because he taught us something right out of the gates that we've used time and time again, which is the way it's always been done hasn't worked very well, so challenge the assumptions. And so he didn't say much more than that, but that was a very key first moment, and that gave me in particular a lot of freedom to kind of, particularly not as a scientist or a doctor, to ask a lot of questions and kind of develop a point of view and figure out how to challenge the status quo, which hasn't really done what it could to deliver new treatments to patients. And
what's your background? How did you get involved in the foundation?
I had no personal connection to Parkinson's disease. Michael was eager to build an organization with impact in mind, and for him that meant find someone with business training. So I had come from Wall Street. I worked at Goldman Sachs for 9 years in my first career and had shifted to the nonprofit sector, and as he went looking, my name came up as probably one of the rare people to leave the for-profit sector for the nonprofit sector. So we really met based on my interest as a problem solver and his goal to solve some big problems.
And in terms of the fundraising, also was your Wall Street background useful in terms of bringing in others, between you and the star power, as it were, to help leverage funds and advocacy as well?
Our most significant donors today aren't really people that we knew at that time. So but I'd say my background from Wall Street was really focused on how do you make a case that you can bring value to someone's investment, and that's very much what we do, working with philanthropists in the Parkinson's community. And in some ways, we're best known for how we deploy the dollars that we spend in research, but we have a particularly unusual revenue model, as it turns out, which I do kind of think is a little bit of a vestige of my days at Goldman on how to bring value to the investor. And in this case, the investor is a Parkinson's philanthropist.
And incidentally, are many or a significant proportion of the donors themselves in some way personally touched by Parkinson's themselves, or family members or friends?
As you'd imagine, that is the case, but you'd be surprised really to see how many gifts, significant gifts we receive from people who have no personal connection to Parkinson's. And while that may not be a surprise for our lower dollar donors, people who admire Michael, that's not uncommon for donors of all levels. But we've received, a $3 million gift, for instance, from someone with no personal connection to Parkinson's. So you really can see a variety of motivations, but the vast majority of people do have a stake in the outcome.
So when you were starting out the foundation, and you presumably did the rounds of the pharma industry in particular, getting a sense of what was out there or what was in the pipeline, what was your impression in terms of the ability to meet this unmet medical needs?
Actually, we didn't start by checking in with the pharmaceutical industry, just because I don't think we had that perspective yet. We did start, as many groups do, by checking in with, what's the state of research more through the discovery lens. And so we interacted principally with basic researchers and clinical researchers, but that, what we found was that there was no end to the interesting questions that researchers would be willing to ask and answer with our dollars. And that did lead us, fairly early on to do two key things. One, to hire scientists on staff to really ascertain and understand what are all the relevant strategies that we could undertake, and then so that we could really establish our own internal point of view on the science. But it also led us to really speak to folks within industry, mostly to understand how to prioritize. And so we were keen early to understand the difference between interesting scientific questions and questions that would be relevant for drug development. And so that really informed how we would prioritize the allocation of our dollars.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your sense, though, in terms of the focus that was being given or not being given to Parkinson's by the whole kind of medical research community as it was then?
It's better today than it was when we started in terms of pharmaceutical company interest and commitment to Parkinson's. I have to say, from day one, we realized we just have to have a sober understanding of what it takes for a company to be committed to PD. And when we look at how we allocate dollars, what we're thinking about is how can we use our capital to de-risk a Parkinson's program for a bigger investor than us. And so, 90% of our dollars are going between target validation and phase 2 clinical trials. We really don't ever see ourselves as the ones who will cure Parkinson's, but we will enable a good preclinical program to be de-risked sufficiently so that a deeper pocketed investor will come along. And I think we've made a lot of progress in convincing these skeptical industry executives that there are good programs in PD to be looking at and embracing. And so more folks are active today than they were when we first started.